Ah, yes. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, we're ready.
All right, let's go ahead and call the Capital Funding Protection Committee for April 6, 2023 to order. Can I please have a roll call?
Devin Reese. Charlene Bybee.
Here.
Paul Anderson. Here. Alexis Hill.
Here.
Jeannie Herman. Here. Justin Ivory.
Here.
Andrew Diss.
Here.
Elise Bunkowski. Chris Cobb.
Here.
Dave Solero.
Here.
Miguel Martinez.
All right, very good. Before we get rolling on to 2.02, are there any public comment cards for any of the items under 2.01? Or let's see, do we have any public comment cards for any of the items under section 2?
No public comments.
Perfect, thank you. So we'll go on to 2.01's approval of the minutes of the February 15th, 2022 meeting of the Capital Funding Protection Committee. Entertain a motion.
Anderson, move to approve.
A motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Takes us on to item 2.02, information and discussion on the anticipated cadence and workload for future meetings of the Capital Funding Protection Committee. Mr. Searcy.
Good afternoon. For the record, Adam Searcy, Chief Operating Officer for the school district. As we always do, we have updated the draft topics and schedule for upcoming agenda meetings. We have the exhibit before you. I won't go through this in as much depth and detail. Not much has changed, honestly, but you'll see many common themes and projects that you've either heard about in the past or will hear more about tonight as we look ahead into fiscal year 24. Our next meeting, of course, in June, we'll be looking at some fiscal year 24 items, so very specifically the FY24 capital renewal plan, and then we'll also have the FY24 IT device refresh plan at that time. I failed to include that on the look ahead, but those will be detailed 23-24 programs of projects, and then of course all of the other major projects that are shown there. Moving into August, we'll be in a new committee year, so we may or may not have some musical chairs and new members and elections, etc. As we move into the fall, we'll begin analyzing the potential need for a Stonebrook area elementary school. As you recall, we've been authorized to and begun the design on that. We'll see where enrollments and demands are at, possibly as soon as August or into the fall in September. You'll see in the September would otherwise be October meeting, or as we often do, move it a month or a week ahead. We'll make sure that's clear in your calendar. But again, starting to get close on Vaughn construction phase. That Vaughn project is underway in design, and by September meeting, we anticipate having a very advanced construction budget and schedule in anticipation of potentially requesting construction phase funding allocation in December. So that's really the quick overview. Happy to discuss any of that look ahead, but this is really just intended to keep everyone kind of in sync with the pace since we only meet every other month.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Searcy? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. We'll move on to item 2.04, which is a presentation and discussion to provide an update on the district-wide school facility modernization plan. Mr. Searcy.
Good afternoon again. This item is in support of a potential funding recommendation in 2.05. So as we often do, a brief verbal or visual presentation of a topic in support of a potential funding recommendation. So we've heard multiple times on the facility modernization plan study. Just to briefly summarize, this committee's authorized us funding to proceed with a consultant-led study of the adequacy and equity of all of our school facilities across the district. So we've engaged with a group called Canon Design, and they've spent a significant amount of time just assessing tremendous amounts of data across all of our schools, physically inspecting almost all of them themselves, as well as assembling some initial stakeholder advisory groups, convening several community forums to establish norms and goals and objectives for this study. They presented to the Board of Trustees some 3 times and actually made a recommendation related to the Vaughn project that we talked about earlier. As we near kind of the next phase of this engagement, wherein we anticipate speaking very specifically about potential options and very specifically about schools individually, it has been a direct request of the superintendent that we enhance that community engagement considerably, noting the deep emotional impacts and complex conversations that truly must occur in advance of any decisions being made. We're in full support of that. The scope to increase that engagement is on the order of, 20 some individual community meetings. It basically extends the time frame from what was otherwise May 2023 through the end of calendar year 2023, so about an 8-month time extension. That was not anticipated with the original scope, so unfortunately we're not able to execute that amendment without additional budget authorization. You may or may not have seen news of our community forum up at Incline Village, the first of others to come. Those are the types of important community engagement efforts that ultimately will better inform any recommendations and ideally lay a healthy foundation for any change that may be recommended as a result of this study. So that's the summary of where we're at, and the ask before you in item 2.05 is to authorize additional funding so that we might execute an amendment to expand the scope as I just described. So that's all I have. Happy to entertain any discussion on that.
Well, I've got to commend you because I inadvertently jumped right over an item and you didn't even miss a beat and went right into 2.04. So thank you for that, even though that was really not my intent.
I'm a little punchy right now. It was a long night at Incline.
Yeah, no, I figured that. Super professional jumping right into that one. So are there any, looks like we've got a question from Commissioner Hill on 2.04.
Oh, 2 point, not,
Yeah, Commissioner,
not the,
I inadvertently jumped over 2.03, which is the capital improvement plan, and jumped right into 2.04, and Mr. Searcy didn't even question it and just jumped right onto it. So not even.
okay, well, I still would like to comment, not on the capital. I mean, we will probably discuss the capital improvement plan as well, but I'm in full support. I really appreciate the first meeting of many and Incline. Thank you so much. And I know it was tough. I've heard from many community members, but I think that those are important conversations to have. So I commend you, and I commend the superintendent in asking for the additional funding, and I'm in full support.
Thank you.
All right, are there any other comments on 2.04? All right, thank you, Mr. Searcy. Thank you, Commissioner. Let's then rewind back to where I should have gone, which is item 2.03, the presentation, discussion, and possible action to recommend approval of the fiscal year 2024-2028 5-year capital improvement plan to the Washoe County School District Board of Trustees. Mr. Searcy and Mr. Mathers.
I thought it was just because you didn't want to hear from me, Dave. Yeah.
All right, I'll kick this one off again as well. Thank you all. We'll start on the next slide, please. This is really just an overview of what is encompassed in this CIP. It's not just WC1 funding. It is statutorily required, as with all public agencies. You're likely very familiar with this. So we'll be going through the entirety of the program that we update every year. On the next slide, I think it's really important always to emphasize what this is and what this is not. This is a plan It's an important plan that a lot of thought goes into and a lot of analysis, both from a demand and a resource sides, but it is not an actual authorization of any of these projects. So it's an important opportunity for us to discuss what is likely and may be to come. But each and every one of these projects or programs will have to come back before this committee and the board to actually move forward with them. So just a point of clarification. To bring us to where we are today, a number of folks worked very hard to assemble this, to just really boil it down kind of into 3 components and steps. You'll hear this theme a bit this evening. We first look at growth demands. So that's really kind of our number 1 priority. If we have overcrowded schools, if we have areas of growth concerns in the near future in this 5-year horizon, we need to identify those and make adjustments and plan for those accordingly. So that's oftentimes our most urgent direction of work. Our second priority, our pillar, as we'll talk about, is our asset renewal or our capital renewal, both critical repairs of our school facilities and also departmental needs requests, including nutrition services, transportation, etc. And then the third element, major element of the CIP, is now our facility modernization plan. We'll talk much more about that. We put that together from a needs standpoint, and then we work closely with the business office to model the financial resources and then work back and forth if necessary to evaluate and balance this out. So with that, I'll segue over to the business office. Mark Mathers.
Thank you, Adam. Mark Mathers, Chief Financial Officer. So as Adam just said, we do a fair amount of financial modeling when we put together the CIP, and of course, like any public agency, the major constraint is of resources, i.e. revenues, to accomplish the projects we'd like to accomplish. And so we're no different than any other agency in that regard. There is a cap, and that's the available revenues that we have to operate under. As you all know, really our capital improvement program is constrained to 2 major funding sources: the WC1 sales tax, which you can see is seen very strong revenues. We've seen average growth in that revenue since passage of 9.7% a year. However, we are seeing a definite flattening of revenues in the last 3 months of the fiscal year. And we've kind of factored that into our modeling. The second major revenue source are property taxes. As I think all of you know, the school district has a debt rate that's fixed in law. It is effective through 2035. It's 38.85 cents per $100 evaluation. And so we continue to receive those monies directly from the county treasurer. And we've seen, again, strong growth there, again, based on kind of just development trends in the county. So the numbers we received from the State Department of Taxation showed 6.5% growth anticipated for fiscal year 24. So you can see there, we expect to receive a little less than $82 million of property taxes, which go to pledge our rollover bonds. I kind of glanced over our WC1 sales tax monies. Those are running around $65 million a year. So considerable amount of resources for this CIP, certainly, but again, there's a real world kind of constraint. I should have said the first bullet point, and it kind of noted the first bullet point here. When we do financial modeling, we use a mixture of debt financing and pay-as-you-go. And of course, it's always more efficient to do pay-as-you-go because you're not paying interest to bondholders. So we try to do that as much as possible, but given the cost of our schools, really the only times we're able to really do that are elementary schools, and only part of them, as well as other facilities that are kind of below that $40 million threshold. When we start looking at middle schools and high schools, the costs of them are just so high it would take years to sock away enough money to do them and pay our current debt service. So in those cases, we would employ debt financing. So both sales tax and property tax, again, are bondable. We can issue debt that pledge either of those revenue sources, and we can also use those revenue sources on a pay-as-you-go basis. The last revenue source here is a much lower, has much lower monetary amount, between $5 and $6 million a year, and that's our government services tax. Virtually all public agencies receive a sliver of that tax that we all pay on our vehicles. We certainly have a small share there as well. So those are the revenue sources that by and large comprise our capital improvement program. So where we start is we will model those revenues out even further than 5 years, but certainly for the CIP within that 5-year time frame. We go through a number of different scenarios, but this page basically lays out the annual revenues from each of those sources. You don't, however, see property tax revenues projected here because those revenues technically go into a debt service fund and then can be transferred out for pay-as-you-go projects or are used for debt service on our rollover bonds. And so for technical reasons, you won't see those revenues projected here. So again, the largest revenue remaining would be our WC1 sales tax revenues, and you can see projected growth for that revenue. And then underneath that, you'll see where we've planned bond issuances of our WC1 bonds. And so you can see those in years 2 and 3 and 5. And then rollover bonds, we've assumed issuance or programmed issuance of bonds in years 1, 2, and 4. So again, the idea here is to use our resources most effectively. We model those out. We have a number of iterations where capital projects and us go back and forth on, can we fund this? If we did this and tweak that and did less in year 2 but more in year 4, is that achievable, and so forth. So there's just a number of iterations we go to get to this place, and this is based on the priorities of our capital projects department, again, within those revenue constraints. The next slide just gives you a visual pie chart of those revenue sources. We start, I should have said, with a fair amount of beginning fund balance. Those are proceeds of bonds and also sales tax that are sitting in reserve and available for capital projects. Those total $178 million. That's the blue sliver there. And then you can see the other sources that go into development of the CIP. So unless there are any questions, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Adam to talk about the actual projects in the plan.
Okay, I'll just continue with this concept of 3 pillars. I find it helpful to kind of group all of these line items as you see kind of described here, as I mentioned earlier. On the next slide, just to elaborate a little bit further on those major projects, first starts with what we have. We've obviously established a significant amount of additional capacity over the last several years, addressed pent-up overcrowding, while always looking at growth projections and making sure that we're prepared to meet the needs of the future and beginning early enough to strike that balance with timing. As I mentioned, the capital renewal program, we'll go into details on that in our next meeting in June, but that's your more traditional boilers and roofs and carpentry projects and landscaping and painting and windows, etc. I'll note that this fiscal year, FY24, we have long anticipated increase. Fortunately, it's ready to meet the world of inflation, but $50 million pledged annually at this point towards exclusively these capital renewal projects, which will be itemized for you at our next meeting. And then the facility modernization program, really characterized by 3 major types of projects: revitalizations, renovations, and replacements. It's currently in this CIP by far the largest portion of what we anticipate in the next 5 years, the details of which are actively still coming into focus. The next slide also similarly is just a visual depiction of that distribution of projects. You can see, of course, items like debt service and program administration called out, but while they're not grouped together, if you take the, because I'll show you on the next slide, we titled some of these projects as specifically as we could, but in all essence, the facility modernization projects, the revitalizations, the Vaughn Middle School rebuild, the middle school and high school renovations projects are essentially all a part of that facility modernization pillar that I mentioned, and that's approximately 40% of this entire pie. That's why I mentioned it's really the largest portion of this pillar, but also one that's arguably less urgent. So if conditions do change, we feel we have flexibility in that area to meet the needs of the future. So this is the same information as in the pie chart, just depicted in a more line item, year by year format. This is really the details behind the plan, and I've got a number of kind of project specific slides that will go forward. But so I'll maybe gloss over some of the line items that have details on, specifically Debbie Smith. Of course, we've yet to contract for the balance of that work. You'll be hearing about that several times in the next several meetings, but construction is underway out there, and we're looking forward to contracting for the entirety of the work. The transportation expansion, we have a presentation on here later this evening. That's nearing ready to go to construction. Land acquisitions, this is just simple funding for a potential new elementary school parcel. We're negotiating terms. Of course, deals like that we would have to bring back to the committee and the school board to bring to fruition, but this is just to demonstrate a budgetary allocation in case that is needed. A future Stonebrook area elementary school, as I mentioned at the onset, will anticipate or we'll reevaluate the need this fall. The next 5 line items: revitalizations, Vaughn middle school renovation, high school renovations, facility modernization projects, could be characterized all as facility modernization projects. As I mentioned, the entirety of that program is still being brought into focus. We wanted to try to depict this and describe these as thoroughly as we feel we're able to at this time, but with respect to the ongoing facility modernization project study, many of the specific projects haven't yet been identified. So thinking in terms of revitalizations, renovations, and rebuild projects, that's how we chose to depict and ultimately model that slice of the future CIP.
Mr. Searcy, when's that study supposed to be completed? Refresh my memory.
So with the extension that we're hoping to execute for that enhanced engagement, we're looking to conclude with a recommendation that will come to the committee first and then the school board before the end of 2023.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely.
Just stopping for just a second here. You have the middle school renovation, high school renovation. You said those are part the facility modernization projects. What else? Is that just breaking out 2 pieces of that? And then what else would be encapsulated in the facility modernization projects? Just kind of basic examples of what we're looking at.
So just for sort of visual examples, revitalizations, maybe you're familiar with some of the work we did in many of the older elementary schools throughout Central Sparks in the early 2000s, but we're talking a couple $1 million kind of fit and finish upgrades, level of scope. Those would be more generically applied to some of our newer schools to bring them up appropriately. Major renovations, both to the middle school and the high school. I think the most relevant example might be Swope Middle School, where we did not demolish and replace the school. It was certainly more than a revitalization, but a meaningful shot in the arm. You're looking at maybe your middle-age schools for that type of scope. I wouldn't be surprised to hearken to Sparks, your Mendives, your Shaws, your Reed high schools in that renovation category. And then the facility modernization projects, as you can see, grow as we get into the out years, still depicted in a more generic format, and then pending the results of that study are likely to be very specifically itemized in future years.
Okay, so the study will really be applied to that, in that category, to the facility modernization.
That's right.
Depending on what the study tells us.
That's right.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Hill.
Thank you. as a new board member, I was just wondering, do we count ball fields or football fields or track as facilities?
We do, in the sense they're on school district property. So, you know, Swope Middle School, Vaughn Middle School, certainly all of our high schools. When we say facilities, we mean the entire property, not just the buildings.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. I've got a slide later in this deck related to the administrative central services offices, but obviously that's a noteworthy element of this CIP. The next line item is the annual capital renewal program. So as I've discussed, that's going to be itemized in next month's meeting in great detail. So going on to the next slide, I'm sorry, that one there. These are additional non-major capital project expenditures of the CIP. You can see while there are many rows in this on this page, you know, this is roughly 10% the scale in dollars as what's depicted on the previous slide. But just a couple of highlights. That second line item, IT device refresh program, that's similar in some ways to our annual capital renewal program and will come before the committee in detail next month for FY24 consideration. I'll also note about halfway down the page, fleet purchase. This is our medium-term notes to help us acquire new buses, for example, and certain white fleet vehicles across the district, maintain a healthy and operational fleet. And I think those are kind of the highlights. I'll offer a moment if there's any questions on these ones.
On the fleet purchase, I don't have year over year like what we had on the last one. I left that sheet at home. Could you just refresh me as to what, and like on last year, what we had, did the, like in the year 2, 24, 25, did we have $5 million in that for last year?
No, we did not. In last year's CIP, we had kind of a steady, flat 3.4 million a year.
And I'm just curious why this number is, it's like we opened, you know, cracked the door open, said, yeah, we can kind of see where this needs to be done, but
Yeah. Let me
got a
try-
little heartburn over the fact that now the numbers are starting to get really big.
Sure. Let me try to cover that. So first, you see in year one an actual decrease in the size of the face value of medium-term bonds we would issue, and that's because we've again seen supply chain issues for the white fleet we order. So we just downscaled the size of that bond to so that we can purchase vehicles with the proceeds we have that remain. And so we're not buying any white fleet next year. We've got enough proceeds remaining just to, you know, wait for the cars to be delivered there. The reason why you see some upsizing in years 2 through 3 is because of kind of the bulge or bubble of buses we had to buy roughly 15 to 20 years ago. So there were some issues with the model of buses we had bought 15, 20 years ago. There were issues with the roofs of those buses, so we ended up buying a sizable number of buses 15, 20 years ago. Now they're reaching the end of their life. So we feel like we have to increase the size of of that bonding to replace those buses in a reasonable time frame. What we're doing there, though, is to minimize the annual debt service is stretching out the term. So normally we have a 4-year term on this debt, and we're stretching that out to contain ourselves within the, you know, the funding we had before. So we're getting $5 million of buses in years 2 through 3 at the same annual debt service as we did with when we had $3.4 million budgeted by stretching out the term to try to accommodate this bulge in buses we need to make to replace the bus fleet, but keep it within the constraints that we had. And then you can see we lowered it back down in years 4 through 5 to basically the same dollar amount of $3.5 million a year.
And just to be clear on this one again, this isn't WC1 money that's paying for this one. This comes out of a different fund.
It does. It comes out of our government services tax monies. Yes, sir.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide, I've got several project-specific slides that I'll just spend a little bit more detail on. I kind of highlighted them verbally with the number slide, but you know, we've talked about W. Smith CTE Academy High School a number of times and will again, so I won't belabor it here this afternoon, other than this slide. So as I mentioned, they're actively underway construction. We've recently awarded the second major construction contract. You'll see tremendous earthwork activity out there as soon as weather permits, and we'll likely be back to you in the next meetings for supplemental funding to allow us to contract for the balance of that work. We expect to put out to bid second quarter 2023.
Adam, quick. So
Yes.
you're hard bidding that now? Or you're still going through the Seymour process?
We've actually worked closely with the CMAR contractor to break the contracts up, and we hard bid the initial contract, which is primarily a demo and abatement for cost effectiveness. The second construction contract we've actually awarded via GMP, primarily earthwork scope. The next one will be the largest. Third construction contract will likely be delivered via CMAR with the buildings and complexity, and then there will even be a fourth one, a much smaller, likely hard bid project.
Okay.
Just doing everything we can to really get the best value for dollar on that project. So we have a whole presentation on the Central Transportation Yard later this afternoon, so I won't get into this other than to note this is a major project anticipated in FY24. Also forecasted in FY24 from a funding standpoint is a new elementary school in Stonebrook. So the images you see on this slide are from this 2018 presentation when we actually acquired the site. If anybody's familiar with that terrain out there, there's nowhere near as much green as there is in this aerial. And we're nearing the opportunity or the need for that school. You can see Sky Ranch and Bow Hatch nearby middle and elementary schools. So we'll be back in the fall and assessing the need for that. This next slide just speaks a little more thoroughly to the status of that. We are actively underway with the design of that school and will be prepared to put it out to bid should the demand warrant this fall. Currently, growth forecasts are certainly trending that direction. You can see Bow Hatch and Sky Ranch are both quite full. And then that final bullet, as I've mentioned, we'll be back to reassess that this fall.
Adam, quick question. So what is the size, I should know this number, but what's our capacity we've been building the elementary schools for? And as we look at, once you assess the demand at Stonebrook, what size, because it almost seems obviously we need bigger school, a bigger elementary than we've built if they're filling that fast. So what have we been building, and would we look at this school possibly being slightly larger and having a bigger capacity so that we're not looking to once again have to add another school? What are our numbers?
Yeah, that's fair. The sort of standard size of our schools is driven much more by the nature of the work within them. How many students and their adjacencies and the different types of classes that want to cohabitate within an elementary school environment. Basically saying, at a certain point, too big is not ideal for an elementary school environment. That said, trying to be most efficient with our tremendous investments relative to these schools. We've been building this particular elementary school prototype, which will be the same basically style and model as Bow Hatch at a rated capacity of 700 students. Today there's over 800 students in Bow Hatch, and that's climbing. The middle schools are about twice that. The newest middle schools are between 1,200 and 1,400 max capacities. The high schools over 2,000. So, you know, I think in the fall, part of the analysis will not only be what the enrollments look like, is the demand materializing as we've anticipated, but also what our options are. Our options for temporary capacity that we're alluding to here in terms of portables, et cetera, but also our options with regards to rezoning. That is a tool in our toolbox. That's not a tool to be used lightly, but you know, when we're talking about this scale of investment, that's the type of scenarios that we're going to look at carefully and we're going to bring forward before making a recommendation on proceeding or pausing progress on a new school.
A couple of quick questions. I know you got all these numbers on top of your head, so we were having a debate earlier. What's the square footage on the new elementary school? What?
88.5.
88.5.
Pretty close.
And the middle schools are
188.
188. Okay.
Yeah.
And then on these numbers that you've talked, I don't want to go back too far, but on the numbers you were talking about, it just kind of hit me as like where you've got the proposed expenditures. Do these numbers, is this facility only, or does it include the FF&Es?
So just to be clear, we'll speak about the Stonebrook area elementary school line item in year one, 55 million. The design phase funding has already been allocated in FY23, so that's not shown here. The 55 is intended to represent our total construction phase budget, so that would be construction and FF&E, permits, professional services, the remaining expenditures necessary to bring that school to life.
Thank you.
So, okay, back to Cold Springs Area High School. Two more slides, 17. We're on slide 17. So we've had this in the CIP in years past. We wanted to spend some time talking about it, the fact that it's not in this 5-year CIP. It's always been anticipated, and it continues to be anticipated, that growth in the North Valleys will ultimately warrant and dictate a new high school to serve all the students up there. You can see prominently on this slide the current enrollment in North Valleys High School and the projected enrollments. They've got some unique headwinds and tailwinds kind of working together in this graph. Most notably, that vertical blue line is intended to illustrate the opening of the Debbie Smith CTE Academy in 25-26 school year. That's anticipated to enroll a significant number of students that would otherwise be going to North Valleys High School. Also baked into these numbers is what we've frequently referred to as an enrollment bubble that we're currently experiencing, historically larger than normal now junior and senior class sizes as they matriculate out of the school district and smaller kindergarten classes replace them. The overall school district enrollment is anticipated to kind of feel that ebb and flow, particularly at the high school level. All the while, the tailwinds of growth in the North Valleys community, and that's really the art here in forecasting the exact student generation and pacing of that residential development. And we've been talking and searching and researching this continuously, keeping it in the 5-year CIP, and some definitive changes within the last 6 months related specifically to these 3 major developments, but really the economy in general has given us sufficient pause to actually remove it from this 5-year CIP. I want to be crystal clear on the next slide that it's not gone forever. We've got a 5-year planning horizon here. It's liable to come back and could as we reevaluate this 5-year CIP annually. But at this time, with all best knowledge and forecasts, it is not anticipated to be necessary within that time frame. On this slide 18, I mentioned a couple of points. I'll also highlight portables. Okay, it's not an ideal tool, it's not a long-term solution, but it is a tool in our toolbox, and it is one that we are implementing at North Valley High School this summer. Those numbers at North Valley High School are not ideal. There is mild overcrowding there, and we are acting on that immediately. We are also anticipating conversations related to the facility modernization study that could provide short to medium term moderate relief for that overcrowding, while the long-term growth has an opportunity to develop such that a entirely new high school is warranted. So the punchlines, as I mentioned, the demand and funding are now forecasted beyond the horizon of this 5-year CIP. However, this will be reevaluated annually, and circumstances may change a year from now. Just really wanted to highlight something that's not in the CIP. Just one slide only on the FMP. We've talked about this quite a bit, and we will continue to talk about it throughout the end of 2023 and beyond. We mentioned the Vaughn Middle School extensively. It features very prominently in FY24, and we'll be back several times to the committee to talk to you specifically about that project. And then, as I noted, some 40% of the entire CIP is comprised in various projects associated with this FMP, approximately an average of $130 million per year. Transformative level of investment. We're taking tremendous care to identify the timing and nature of those investments. The final FMP and the individual projects will be approved by this committee and the board before they go forward. So only one slide on this one as well. You know, a 50,000 foot level type of conversation, but one that we really wanted to prominently put forward. It's been an active topic of conversation, more so in recent years than ever in the past, but it is a replacement of this facility in some form or fashion as it relates to central services and administration of the Washoe County School District. And you know, this certainly is an aged building, some 60 years old itself, that I'm not sure what the enrollment of the school district was in 1962 or whatnot, but it's outlived its ideal useful life. And you know, as much as the facility conditions are kind of where I live, we talk with architects about educational adequacy and how the science teacher wants to live across the hall from the math teacher so that ideal collaboration can occur. And that is absolutely an impairment that the school district endures here in central services, having important departments fractured across different facilities, or collaborative departments unable to work in adjacency to each other. That, you know, we're always under-resourced and understaffed, but further impaired by that proximity challenge. We have leased spaces in some instances that are certainly a drain on resources. So planting a flag at this point, looking seriously at options for a new permanent central services administrative facility. Wanted to just summarize it with a couple of different concepts. We've certainly looked at buying an existing building elsewhere and renovating it. There's significant pros and cons with that approach. Buying different property elsewhere and building new on it. Again, pros and cons associated with that approach. Or a scenario that's depicted in this exhibit of building new on site. I don't know if you have your bearings from that aerial, but kind of the lower left-hand corner of that map is really where we're sitting now, approximately. And if you can imagine the rest of this parcel, there is quite a piece up to the north and east that is largely parking lot and or warehouse, or actually currently occupied by our IT department, space that's readily relocatable and space that could be developed perhaps while this space is still under operation. And the exhibit right there was actually created on a high-level study by a local architect with the appropriate degree of specificity to really just prove out the concept that a multi-story building could be constructed on this parcel, perhaps with a garaged parking, perhaps with flat parking, to suit the current and future needs of the school district's central services administrative staff, again, in a more centralized, collaborative, and ultimately efficient type of environment. And in this scenario, with the garaged parking, preserving some 5 acres, essentially where we sit now, for other use by the school district or perhaps others. So these are merely concepts, and we're in this CIP out several years before any additional action would occur. But this is intended to express a response to many departmental needs and requests at the school district, not just the traditional school facility assessment and enrollment, et cetera, but also needs and concerns that we've heard from the community and this committee even.
Just a couple questions. Projected staff in 27, you have 366. How does that compare to today?
It's increased slightly. They have some very generic, sort of inflation-esque
Are we above 300
categories.
now?
No, ma'am. Or, pardon me. Are we above 300, did you say?
I didn't wear my pink heels
I'm
like Tammy
sorry.
did today. Sorry.
That was a little quick. I don't have that number precisely. We're over 300, but below 366.
Okay. And then the board, like a new version of this room, would be housed in this new building as well?
That's the intent, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to ask the question that I think everybody's thinking. How many schools do we have that are older than 1962 that are going to, in theory, be behind this construction?
The number of schools total that we have that are more than 50 years old is in the neighborhood of 50. That's pretty close to accurate. What the needs are of every one of those schools is actually kind of different. You know, you've got your Roy Gomes and your Jesse Becks, and maybe you've got your Green Brays and your Drakes that may have very different lives for very different reasons. I think it is an important question and conversation about which should come first. School district administration. I think another aspect I failed to mention, the centralized versus decentralized note at the top of this page. You know, as a part of this facility modernization plan, there's potentially scenarios where schools may be consolidated, thereby making available what is today an active school, what tomorrow could be a decentralized administrative facility. If any of you have ever been to the Brown Center, where many of us in capital projects work on a daily basis, of course, that was once an elementary school and is now an excellent school administrative facility. So that's part of the solution, and that could certainly impact the size of any future centralized administrative facility. But I think the work that we're going to be able to put into those 50-plus-year-old schools very aggressively throughout this same CIP timeline and the available resources create an opportunity for us to take bold action with respect to the administrative needs of the district as well.
Okay, I only ask because obviously when you look, you know, when you're looking in from the outside, it's looking like administratively we're going to get a nice shiny building while the kids in 49 schools that are older than this facility are going to wait a little extra. So I guess we'll have to see how this plays out, I guess.
Appreciate that.
Like, to kind of follow up on that, on this CIP project, can WC1 money be used for this or only for the schools?
I'm going to go ahead and say yes. Mark is the definitive expert on that matter.
Yeah, we've asked council that question. The answer has come back as yes. We can use WC1 for that. Not to say that it would be ultimately, but we can.
Okay, and I was trying to remember because I worked on WC1 to make sure it got passed, and I was trying to think on the messaging. Were we messaging at that time that we got the community to buy in and approve that sales tax increase? Did we message that this would be part of it, not just new schools and renovating and keeping up with older schools? Was it part of our messaging?
I think that's a really great point, and I appreciate your historical perspective on that. And the answer to your question is that it was not. I also know if you were on the Public Schools Overcrowding and Repair Needs Committee, sort of like the Sean Carey precursor to developing the WC1 ballot measure itself. There were versions of the program that were debated. Some that included an administrative facility, and that was not the version of the program that was ultimately included on the ballot measure. So, again, the answer to your question is no.
Adam, I think you could also say the same thing about facilities modernization plan. I don't think that one, because I remember there being a list of schools basically that we were going to address right away. So I don't know that, because I agree with what you're saying is, hey, what did we promise? But I think by the time we get to 26 or 27, I think we're beyond kind of where we knew for sure where that original money was going to go. Would that be the right way to say that?
I think that's a fair perspective. I would only add, in the WC1 ballot measure, there was a line item referred to at the time as core school investments that is somewhat been rebranded as facility modernization and is growing beyond what was anticipated in 2016. But these were always needs and were debated in 2015 and 2016 and are today perhaps at a point at which where we can consider bringing them to fruition.
Adam, I imagine you're showing this in FY26 and you're still in the development of the FMP, if that's what we want to call it. So I can see that this being a 5-year plan like anything, your FMP comes back in as a driver on these schools like we're talking about that are a lot older, that could adjust the CIP and where this lands as well. Would you envision that?
So with the CIP in general, there's a significant amount of flexibility, particularly in years 2 through 5. And particularly with projects like this, as well as the FMP projects, they're arguably less time critical rather than a school that's desperately bursting at the seams is more urgent. So much more discussion as conditions change, prioritization can change. This is reevaluated annually. But this is a need of the district and we wanted it to feature prominently for this very purpose. I appreciate the discussion. So moving on, just a couple more slides from me. This is the capital renewal program. Again, we'll go into this in detail next month, but always appreciate sort of a pie chart depiction of the distribution of those projects. We put a little bit more money into carpentry, MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, paving, etc., than some of the other smaller categories, but almost all of the shops in the district get some projects invested on a priority basis, worst first, based on our asset management program. Continuing on, as we mentioned on the itemized slide, we have investments within the CIP associated with our transportation department, some school, police, and safety equipment type of investments, and then as I mentioned previously, IT device asset management investments as also a part of our CIP. So just a couple more slides. Turn it back over to Mark.
Yeah, just real quickly, Mark Mathers, Chief Financial Officer. So obviously this is a large capital improvement program, but there is a, believe it or not, fiscal conservatism that we use when modeling debt. So we strive to have a coverage factor of 20 to 25% on our WC1 bonds. In other words, that we have a buffer of 25 to 25% between anticipated revenues and the annual debt service to reflect the volatility of sales taxes. And if we get a recession, we'll probably need that buffer, right? On property taxes, a much smaller coverage factor of 3% internally that we model just based on how abatements and property tax revenues work in Nevada. But again, the other components we look at when we model debt service are, in addition to that strong coverage factor, that we have sufficient reserves, and you can see there we have more than 75 million in reserves, which represents close to 9 months of debt service we've pre-funded. And then again, we're conservative in how we model the interest rates on debt. All of those are factors that have contributed to kind of the restoration of the district's AA rating a number of years ago. We're proud of that rating. We want to keep that rating. So we'll always be mindful of those constraints as we model and issue new debt going forward.
Thank you, Mark. So with that, I won't read this slide to you all. We're prepared to conclude the presentation. Thank you.
Are there any further questions related to the 5-year CIP for staff? All right, I do notice there's some members of the public here. Is there any public comment on this item?
Yes.
Thanks.
Paulo Navadurang.
Good morning. So, my name is Paulo Navadurang, and I recently saw the Bond Middle School being delayed up to. Sorry, that's okay. So I saw the Vaughn Middle School being delayed up to 26-27 school year. That's okay for the. That's okay because I totally get it because of the judge didn't have a limited time it is. So I want to talk about the inconvenience we posed to school. So hopefully next agenda will come. So have more information. And I do know like many of the school are more than 50 years old. Even some of them were before 1962. For high school, for 1962, this military building gonna build a new military building before the high school, middle school, and middle school. The bill was much older, much before 1962. So I think about 302 High School, Sparks High School, or built 1950. Worcester about built it the same year as that one. That one probably won't of one of it, so that's okay for them. So for middle school, we got we got to take care of the trainer, Spark. There was Sparks Middle School built 1965. So just the trainer Dilworth built 1961. The middle school is just built like I don't know how many years it is. It is. Hopefully, I will prove the proper. Hopefully, this one trainer and Dell will need to take care of it, and we know Spark need to take care of it before the code allowed to build a new mature building. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion on this item? I will go ahead and entertain a motion.
Motion to approve is presented.
I'll second.
All right, I've got a motion by Cobb, second by Ivory. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, that takes us to item 2.05, presentation, discussion, and possible action to recommend approval of $500,000 of the 2022-2023 C Major Projects Program for projects throughout the district. Mr. Searcy.
Thank you, Chair Solero. This one, was the description that I jumped ahead on a little bit. Always appreciate the opportunity to highlight the structure of this graphic. I appreciate the conversation earlier relative to the original content of the WC1 program. This holds very, very literally to the exact terminology and projects associated that were in that original program. Of course, expanding in some areas to define, in the case, future elementary schools that weren't defined at the time that since have been, and the core school investments program, as it was known, now beginning to develop its portfolio as well. And in the effort of developing that portfolio, as I described earlier, we're requesting an additional $500,000 of budget allocation so that we might augment that consultant's scope to perform that more rigorous level of community engagement. Thank you.
All right, any questions for Mr. Searcy on this item? Yeah.
Adam, can you, so just to make sure I'm clear on it, so the additional 500,000 is for the consultants that are working on the facility modernization plan because that's what the estimated cost will be to do more community engagement and extend the scope on a longer time frame? Is it community engagement that costs? That's a lot of money. And I know, I mean, maybe it's not, but what will that 500,000 include the additional 8 months? Is it a monthly fee that we're paying? Is it just the cost of doing the community engagement? Kind of, could you clarify a little bit more for me?
No, absolutely. It is a lot of money, and it is predominantly derived from labor hours, man hours. These are likely upwards of 20 or more various formats of meetings, larger scale community town halls, slightly more intimate individual school meetings, perhaps even key stakeholder briefings, individual content needed to be created for many of these meetings, and just a lot of individual effort. They've subcontracted with a local communications and strategies partner to have that situational awareness here in Reno. And it's really just that kind of labor-intensive, hands-on community engagement that's desired and necessary. That's breaks this down. It's not a monthly fee. This is actually a fairly detailed, itemized, hourly breakdown of what they anticipate the level of effort to be, and then translate it into a cost.
And this is additional to what we're paying them for the work they've done so far and what we anticipated. This is additional because of the request for, and I appreciate the community engagement piece, absolutely. I mean, I agree with that. So this is just an additional amount because of the extended timeline and the what you just went through.
That's 100% correct. I appreciate the opportunity to emphasize there was due care taken to make sure that scope that was included in the original agreement was not somehow double counted, that a zero line item was noted for scope that was already contracted for, and this is only what's being requested, which is above and beyond the previously contracted scope.
Go ahead.
Adam, just real quick, just to be crystal clear, in the $500,000 that we're going to give to Canon Design, do we also, in that $500,000, do we also have our own staff? Is there time in there for our own staff to be at these meetings also, or is this just for Canon?
That's just for the consultant fee. The staff time is included in sort of the program administration line items within the general bond administration budgets.
So in these meetings, we don't have principals or teachers or counselors from the area that are also participating in the meeting that are getting paid? I'm just asking because I'm not sure.
The majority of the school district staff who will co-facilitate and likely attend many of these meetings are folks like myself and my colleagues in capital projects and communications department. Certainly, we'll also have academic administrators such as area superintendents, more site-specific. You know, we held a meeting at Incline. We haven't announced all of the other meetings, but we're planning a number of other community meetings. So we'll probably have appropriate principals and area superintendents attending those meetings as well. Likely, you know, on salary, after hours type of thing.
Could you do me a favor and remind me, in the original scope of work, what was that amount that was dedicated?
I believe their current contract value is approximately 1.8 million.
Okay, thank you.
Adam, and this 500,000, this just isn't them to go to a meeting. This is not only holding the meeting, but compiling the data behind it, right? They're going to take that information and then help formulate the report, so that it's not paying just for the meeting, it's everything behind it.
Of course, there's a
Okay.
significant amount of work that goes into preparing materials and then receiving the feedback, incorporating the feedback, and in most instances, it's actually going to be iterative, right? We then have to return to the community and further that conversation, and then, of course, what was previously scoped to compile all of it into a comprehensive district-wide report and bring it to the board for consideration.
Okay.
Commissioner Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's the materials on this item, it's just page 51 of the packet, right? There wasn't a contract or other detailed information?
No, you're not missing anything. We did not attach.
Okay.
At this time, we have a draft proposal that's not, you know, it's under negotiation, but we recognize that we would need additional budget authorization to execute anything approaching the scale of the proposal. And because of the timing of this meeting, we felt it was sufficiently mature, ripe to bring forward this request for budget authorization. We're going to conclude the negotiations with the consultant pending the additional budget authorization, and then bring that amendment potentially back to our school board.
Okay, and so the school board executed the consultant, correct?
That's right. The committee here, Capital Funding Protection Committee, authorized the budget based on the description of
Okay.
the scope. We then hired the consultant, took the agreement to the board, and now we're coming back and describing the need to expand the scope, and thereby the need to request additional budget authorization.
Okay, so this committee doesn't approve any contracts with folks. The Canon contract is solely in the hands of the school district. I just want to make sure that we're only doing the budget allocation and the school district makes the choice on consultants and things like that.
You've got it exactly correct. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments on this? This is an action item, so do we have public comment on this item?
No public comment.
Okay, seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I move to approve the $500,000 ad for the Canon design.
Cobb, I'll second.
All right, motion by Ivory, second by Cobb. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. That takes us on to item 2.06, which is a presentation and discussion on the design progress and preliminary construction phase budget of the Central Transportation Yard improvements. Ms. Polson.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. Am I advancing or are you? Okay. Thank you. Teresa Polson, Director of Planning and Design. Here to give you an update today on the Transportation Modernization Project. So we're just going to start out with a little bit of a history on how this project started out. Then we'll talk about the design and the scope of the project, construction phasing, the schedule, and then finally the budget. So the history of this project, we started out doing a master plan study of all 3 sites back in 2020. Those 3 sites are North Facility called Spare, our Schultz Facility that is south of town, and then of course our Central Ghetto transportation location. That study, the intent of it was to analyze not only potential growth for all of our sites, but also to analyze the conditions of the buildings and the equipment as well. What we discovered is that at our north site, there was not any real urgent needs at that site. We do have some underground storage tanks that are of concern for us, fuel tanks that is, that we would like to get out from underground, but there's no essential urgent need to do that. The other item that was discovered at that site was to replace the fuel dispensers. They were in need of replacement, and that project is actually currently going on. At our south site, we did a little facelift there a couple years ago with some paving and circulation, lighting, and some grading that was dealing with some flooding issues that we had at the time. So it's had a little bit of work done already. And so really the central transportation site was highlighted as the most need to do some modernization. So we went straight into conceptual design, hired a consultant to help us identify the scope for that project, and then started design last year in June. So our goals for this project are, again, mainly to relocate our building out of the floodplain, which is on the west side of the site, and we'll look at the site plan here in a few minutes, but also to provide adequate parking and improve the circulation for the buses and staff, providing functional office space for the staff, and they wanted to relocate our dispatch staff from our south site to our central site to work a little bit more efficiently. Remove our underground fuel tanks at that site. They have leaked in the past. That's since been remediated, but certainly want to get those from out from underground since it is in the flood plain, and install new above ground tanks. And then increase safety and security. And also a goal of ours is to add some electric vehicle charging stations for the buses, since that's where we're headed. So this is a photo of our existing site as it looks like today. I don't know if you can sort of center that a little bit better. Thank you so much. Wanted to just point out that there's a little area that's circled in yellow. That area is actually owned by the City of Sparks, but we are leasing that space right now from them for additional parking for our buses and vehicles. And so just a general overview, to the right side, basically this entire site is occupied by what we call our White Fleet staff and our White Fleet vehicles. And on the other side of the site, the west side, is all of our Yellow Fleet transportation staff, and that's where the majority of our buses are parking. I guess before we switch this slide, I'll just kind of go into potential phasing for this. The idea is that we would construct our new building on the east side of the site, so we would demolish the White Fleet building that you see on the right and construct the new building in that similar location. So this is our proposed new site plan. The building you see there on the right. The idea was to consolidate all of our White Fleet staff and our Yellow Fleet staff, as well as their maintenance shops, all into one building for efficiency. Just to the left of that, you see that sort of white shape in the middle of the site. That really is kind of like a retaining wall that's making the transition from the right side of the site to the left side of the site, because it's about 4 feet difference in elevation. And then just to the left of that, you see our fuel dispensers. We have 4 fueling islands with a total of 8 dispensers. We've got propane, diesel, and unleaded gas. And then we are also increasing the capacity of our fuel storage that you see fuel islands just to the left of that. Also including a new wash bay for the buses as well. right there in the center, and then to the left of that is all the new asphalt parking for the buses. Let's see. So I just wanted to point out that the blue, you're not really seeing it on this. Could you maybe zoom out a little bit? The area that's outlined in blue is intended to be the phase 1 of this project. Again, we'll be demolishing the existing white fleet, doing all the parking that's enclosed in that blue line, so that we can then move all the buses to that parking area, construct the new building. We would construct the new fueling tanks and the dispensers. So that would be phase 1. And then phase 2 would be in the whole area in orange, demolishing the yellow fleet, demolishing the old fuel dispensers, the old fuel tanks from underground, and finishing off that parking lot. So this is our floor plan of our new building. It is about 31,000 square feet, and that includes the shop areas. The left side of the building you can see is all of the office space. And that portion of the building is actually a conventional CMU constructed building with a metal roof. But the right side where you see the shops, that is actually intended to be a pre-manufactured building. And the intent of that is to be able to span sort of a greater area without having columns in the way in that shop area. So having a nice big open shop area. As far as the office space itself, we are providing, like I said, an area for our dispatchers. We've got a significant sized training center for all of our drivers. We have a conference room and a nice break room and a covered break area for right outside that break room for staff. The yellow fleet shop, you can see we have a total of 8 maintenance bays for the buses right now. Those are intended to be a full pull-through type shop. And then on the bottom, we've got 3 bays for our white fleet shop. And this is just an elevation showing a couple sides of the building. This is the east side of the building where the main entrance will be. You'll see it on the left there. The covered patio area I was just talking about, so that staff can come out and have breaks and lunches out there. The higher elevation area, we do have a mezzanine being installed that really mainly is for our HVAC equipment, as well as some storage for the facility as well. And then the 3 doors you see there is the entrance to the white fleet shop. The bottom elevation is our south side of the building, and those doors there are the entrance to the yellow fleet shop. And to the left there, you see sort of an open drive-through for buses to go through and just get really quick maintenance type things done, put air in a tire, whatever it is, so they're not taking up space inside the shop. But it's covered so that they're at least out of the weather. So our schedule for phase 1 is currently we're concluding our construction documents at the end of this month. We intend on taking those documents to a third-party estimator to give us some good estimates, hopefully, for this project. And then I plan on coming back to this committee in June for a request for construction funding. And then, of course, we'd roll right into bidding and construction. So construction for that phase 1 is anticipated to be complete in February of 2025. Next slide. Phase 2, similarly, I would come to this committee in June of 2024, so about a year from now. Again, roll right into bidding, but we would not start construction on that phase 2 work, of course, until phase 1 construction is done. So that would not be anticipated to start until March of 2025. Our estimated budget for phase 1 is 33 to 35 million. Phase 2 is 8 to 10 million, with a total estimated construction phase budget cost from 41 to 45 million. That is it. Anyone have any questions?
I got a quick question, just how much do we pay our third-party estimate company?
Typically, it's anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000, depends on the size of the project.
And is there any, do we have anything in our contract that says, hey, if you completely miss it, do we get money back?
No, but I'm taking that on advisement for sure. I'm considering it seriously, yeah.
Just have a question. I'm curious on the White Fleet, if you're going to demolish that site and start the construction there on phase
Yeah.
1, what are you going to be doing for White Fleet maintenance?
They're going to be relocating down to our south site temporarily. So they're going to be smashed in there for a while altogether, but they have done that before, I guess,
Oh,
at
that's
different
right,
times.
actually, that's where they used to be.
Yep.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah, so they'll be relocating down there during that time.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
You mentioned the flood zone aspect. Are you having to elevate the buildings? I know Sparks, they encapsulated the North Truckee Drain there and thought a lot of the property came out when that occurred.
Yeah, so they did do a project to divert everything underground. Since we're putting the building on the east side, that's out of the floodplain.
Okay.
But the wash bay that we are putting on the west side, we do have to elevate for that reason. Yeah.
Just want to verify, all major heavy maintenance for all buses from all three locations occurs on this site, is that right? Or do you have satellite bays?
That's correct.
Yeah, it's all of it
Yeah.
on the site. Okay, got it, thanks. Go ahead.
Just one more quick question. During this construction, do we have some sort of game plan on how we're going to twist the city of Sparks' arm to provide that piece of property that we're maintaining for them?
On behalf of the city of Sparks, I want to let you know we basically donated it to Washoe County School District.
Yes, it's leased at a
There
very,
you go.
very low
There's your
cost.
plug. I hope you're happy.
All right, are there any other questions on this item? All right, thank you very much for that information.
Welcome.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that will take us on to item 3.01, closing public comment. Do we have public comment?
Yes, we do. Paulo Namaduran.
Sorry, school year, and I totally get with it with the construction and the budget issue. And I know the new Vaughn Middle School will have increased the capacity of 1,400 and currently have 700 enrollment, and the capacity is 700, which is the smallest middle school and the older middle school in the Washington School District. So the current service Central Reno 4th year school, and they all go to Wooster High School. So right now, they have a capacity of 14,000, so they're more likely to I will support. So they will have they need like more student to be rezoned from to Vaughn Middle School in 2026-27 school year. And I know with the new area will support rezoning from Pine to Vaughn Middle School in 2026-27 school year, and then hopefully they're rezoned to Wooster High School as well, because all Vaughn will go to Wooster High School, and hopefully maybe rezone Wooster High School in 2027 maybe 2028 school year, maybe later, and that's okay. For me personally, it won't affect my younger sister. That's okay. I will get revenge during senior high school when she pick high school someone else, and I will support. This neighborhood deserve a new school. That neighborhood, 50 years old, more than 50 years old. Well, I will support that new area. Support going in Vaughan Middle School. To relieve overcrowded, potentially overcrowded Pine, because Pine zone are build housing daybreak and Western area, so they will have more students that create overcrowded. So to rezone Vaughan Middle School, Pine will move for Taiwan status, and then I think this is a win-win situation that created a spending for neighborhood school, and hopefully I will support that. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there any other public comment?
No other public comment.
Great, seeing none, we'll move on to item 3.02. So our next meeting will be June 1st, 2023, this location at 4 o'clock. Yes?
I just looked on here and it's June 1st, and I'm looking at the paper that we got with our draft schedule and topics, and it shows June 2nd.
I just checked my calendar and it is
I just looked at
June-
my,
Yep,
it's
it
June
is June
1st.
1st. That is
June
correct.
1st, so we
Yep,
just need to correct the other.
correct.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay, very good. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
We could have used the Taylor Swift, y'all need to calm down.
Oh man.